For a more complete story of the beaver, why not contact the Canadian Wildlife Service in Ottawa?
Well, handsome, what are we waiting for?
I'm Batman. What?
If you want to get to know a character, learn about their interests, goals, or desires, their butt is probably not going to give you that information. It won't tell you much about who they are or what they're thinking or feeling at any given time. But video game designers often choose to put tremendous focus on the butts of certain characters while going to almost absurd lengths to avoid calling attention to the butts of others.
Oh, absolutely, but this is done for a very good reason. In visual media, various techniques are used to draw the attention of the viewer, and even to push it away. This largely depends on what intent the author has for the character. If it's not an important character, they will de-emphasize the actions and visual appeal of it. This in turn helps to subtly guide the viewer down the path the author wants, being attracted and interested in characters that are central to the story.
These carefully crafted choices developers make about camera angles and clothing significantly impact how players think about and relate to these characters. Third-person games with female protagonists typically display those characters in a way that gives players a full-body view. A classic example of this is the original Tomb Raider games, which are presented from a third-person perspective wherein protagonist Lara Croft's entire body is visible. In these early Tomb Raider games, Lara's butt is typically right in the center of the screen, a camera orientation which, along with the sexualized clothing the designers choose to outfit her in, places a tremendous amount of emphasis on that part of her body.
Yes, now the question is, do you know why that's the case? I'm going to let you in on a little secret there, Anita. It's because any character, male or female, is far more interesting when it's sexually attractive. How else do you explain Hollywood frontmen like Brad Pitt and George Clooney?
In dozens of third-person games with playable female characters, the character's butt is brought to the forefront, and that's where the player's focus is directed. In Batman Arkham City, for instance, the player's gaze is drawn to Catwoman's behind, which is emphasized by her costume and exaggerated hip sway.
The ceremony! The Sisterhood will never forgive me if I am late.
Golden Axe Beast Rider makes extremely sure that we notice the protagonist's butt just before we take control and start playing. And here, in Tomb Raider Underworld, to say that Lara's butt is being emphasized would be putting it mildly.
Incredible. The carvings are clearly similar to early Germanic design, but this is far older than the 5th century.
And this happens all too often.
You can't miss it.
Yes, because what's sexually attractive on a woman is typically breasts and ass. You know, all the soft, squidgy parts that men love. Whereas for women, what they find sexy is attributes that convey strength. So, chiseled abs, strong thighs, well-defined back, or even a rigid, veiny personality.
Let's contrast the way that women's butts are emphasized with the sometimes absurd lengths taken to cover up or hide men's butts.
Yes, and like I said before, this is done for a good reason. You do realize that the people that buy these sorts of games are generally men, right? As such, it's going to cater to the wants and desires of men. Do you think Playboy would have sold as many magazines if every third or fourth page they had a male bodybuilder all greased up, laying on a couch? So it shouldn't be surprising that they don't emphasize things their customer base simply isn't interested in.
If some of this footage looks jerky, that's because in some games, trying to get a glimpse of male characters' butts can feel a bit like wrestling with the camera. Common ways men's butts are hidden are by preventing the player from seeing below the character's waistline, or employing a more over-the-shoulder camera angle, which has the added benefit of keeping the character's butt safely out of the frame. The most amusing solution is to simply include a cape, tunic, long coat, or very conveniently positioned piece of tattered fabric, which actively prevents the player from getting a clear or sustained look at the protagonist's butt. For the purposes of this video, I tried to get a glimpse of Batman's rear end, but it's as if his cape is a high-tech piece of Wayne Industries equipment designed to cover up his butt at all costs.
Well, I do have a piece of canon from the Batman universe that disagrees with your Wayne Tech butt covering theory. See, his ass would have been totally visible there.
I like to jokingly refer to this aspect of a male character's costume as the strategic butt covering. Of course, not all games with male protagonists keep the character's butt obscured or out of frame like these games do. The real issue is one of emphasis and definition. A significant portion of third-person games with female protagonists call attention to those characters' butts in a way that's meant to be sexually appealing to the presumed straight male player. In this regard, the way that women's bodies are depicted is significantly different from the way that men's bodies are depicted. There are a few examples of male protagonists who are wearing clothing that calls attention to their butts, but for the most part, men's butts, even when visible in the frame, are de-emphasized.
Again, you seem to forget that this is for a male audience. You know, the people who actually buy the video games.
Plenty of male heroes wear baggy pants or jeans, Uncharted's Nathan Drake among them, but nothing about his visual design or the jeans he's wearing encourages you to focus on his butt as some sort of defining aspect of his character. By contrast, this emphasis on the butts of female characters communicates to players that this is what's important. This is what you should be paying attention to. It communicates that the character is a sexual object designed for players to look at and enjoy. And by explicitly encouraging you to ogle and objectify the character, the game is implicitly discouraging you from identifying directly with her.
That's where you're wrong, Anita. But if you actually look at video games and you look at the female characters that occupy these video games, it's always the characters that the developer wants you to be attached to, the developer that wants you to be interested in, that are the most attractive. Well, why is this the case? That's because to identify with a female character, you first have to put some thought into it. And generally speaking, if you don't care about a character, or you have no interest in that character, you're not going to think much on them.
Strategic butt coverings and camera angles that obscure characters' rear ends are not an accident. They are a conscious decision made with great care, and the flip side of this is that designers often do the opposite when the protagonist is female. This difference in how male and female characters are framed often extends into the advertisements and box covers. Women's butts are front and center, and it's even become a depressing joke that their bodies are twisted and contorted in uncomfortable or unnatural ways so that their breasts and butt can be visible in the same shot. In contrast, when men are depicted from behind, there's great effort taken to cover up their rear end, often with other images or shadows.
But there's also great effort to show them as strong and powerful, with rippling biceps and chiseled backs. Anita, you can't see the forest but for the trees. But then again, your argument wouldn't really work if you included all the ways that men are sexually portrayed in video games.
Of course, female characters can also be framed in ways that aren't objectifying. A good example of this is the episodic adventure game Life is Strange, in which the protagonist's butt isn't emphasized or centralized. The camera angles work in conjunction with the story to encourage us to identify with her as a human being.
Yep, just like how there's video games where men are nerdy and men are total hunks.
Sadly, the box art for the third-person action-adventure game Beyond Good and Evil emphasizes and sexualizes Jade's butt. The game itself, however, demonstrates that the Nathan Drake approach of outfitting a character in clothing that doesn't emphasize their butt and not having the camera center it or focus on it can work just as well to humanize female characters as it does for male characters.
Whoa, did you catch that? Let's listen to that part again.
And not having the camera center it or focus on it can work just as well to humanize female characters as it does for male characters.
So it's Anita's position that the less sexualized a person is, the more that we can relate to them and humanize them. It's rather odd when you think about it. I mean, why wouldn't Anita dress like the person on the left? Especially if that humanizes her and helps us relate to her and her point.
So to be clear, the solution here is not to simply show more butts of male characters. Equal opportunity butt display is definitely not the answer. Rather, the solution is to de-emphasize the rear ends of female characters so that players are encouraged not to ogle and objectify these women, but to identify and empathize with them as people.
No, the real solution here is for you to weigh out your arguments based on rationality and logic, not your own worldview.
This is not an impossible task, given that game designers do this all the time with their male characters. It's time they started consistently doing it with their female characters too.
And do you know how you change this? It's by putting your money where your mouth is. Develop a sizable consumer base that will not buy games that sexualize females. But you're not interested in that, are you? All you really want to do is poke your head into a subject that you're not really interested in, tell people how they should be doing it, and then leaving. Maybe we shouldn't ban the word bossy. Thanks again for watching. If you liked the video, please share, comment, or subscribe. Have a good one.